Honorable Farah Malim, coming to you then. And later we'll be talking about Parliament and why Kenyans are holding the bicameral house in public obloquy because of how it has conducted itself. And the finance bill, of course, the macroeconomic environment, political stability, there is the health challenge. But we are set to borrow 929 billion Kenya shillings to fill the budget deficit. That will come 658 billion from domestic, and it means then Treasury will borrow 271 billion externally. That will come to about 929 billion. We have exhausted 8.4 trillion debt ceiling in the country. Our ceiling is 9 trillion. You have 600 billion to hit 9 trillion. You will borrow 900 billion, which means that will hit 9.3 trillion Kenya shillings. I mean, it's inevitable, isn't it, that Parliament has to upscale this, and that the failure, the House, is seen to be the factor that precipitated this appears to be a legitimate one from the perspective of the common mwananchi. So how do they address this? How will Parliament come and cleanse itself off?
This Parliament and the previous Parliaments have failed this country. Let me tell you one thing. In the 10th Parliament where we were there, I remember we had to give an assent, or rather we were supposed to approve a loan of 1.5 billion Kenya shillings for KPA to acquire additional state-of-the-art cranes that are going to make basically with a very powerful economic returns, high economic returns on the port itself, because the port was expanding, both in terms of traffic volume and in terms of course, the kind of finances that were going to come in. And we had to approve that through Parliament. But that was taken away in the 11th and the 12th Parliament. And they literally just went on scaling this from one figure to the other. You can imagine we had a 1.9 trillion debt
by the time
Kibaki left the office, both domestic and external debts. The first thing they did is they allowed and approved the borrowing of the 275 billion US dollars for Eurobond. Eurobond is not a concessional borrowing. It's a market borrowing. It's an expensive borrowing, very, very expensive borrowing. And at that time, the IMF said there are certain conditions that you must fulfill. One, it has to be a critical development issue. The investment must be in critical development that are going to have high financial as well as social returns, economic and social returns for the country. Now, what was high, what do you call economic and social returns about the SGR?
For instance, for example, yes.
For example, that's just one example. And then where did the rest of the money go into? Where did the rest of the money go into? The reason why we're going for this Eurobond and we're going for all this other, crazy borrowing from the market is because you can't go to IMF and the World Bank and borrow money from there and be paid a certain percentage as kickbacks. You can't. But then you go to the Chinese, you go to Eurobonds, you go to all those things. There are people who basically are experts in that and who arrange these things. You see what I mean? And they're all secured, by the way. They're all secured. In the end, they're going to be secured with their own powerful infrastructures. You might be surprised, but we might end up with a situation in which if the loans of a certain government is not paid, some of this crazy, careless borrowing that we're making, they might take over our ports, they might take over our airports. You get my point? They'll probably take, already we've got an SGR here, but we have destroyed the road sector. And how much of it has been in economic terms? When you do
especially for the county of Mombasa, for example.
The profit of loss. County of Mombasa has gone to hell. The network, the road network between Mombasa and Nairobi has gone to hell. Because instead of those trucks going through, the economic activities in all those places were massive. They're no longer there.
Okay.
So basically, we have. I think I have a feeling that the current regime will say, so what? You do what you can do. You borrow as much as you can borrow, and you leave it.
Okay.
In 1 year's time, they're going to have a new government in here.
Okay.
And I pity the person who is going to become the president of this country 2022.
Okay. Now, the government might not be in a position and, as you say, do what you can. Basically, it's that attitude. But the entity that needs to be checking on these excesses is Parliament. And Article 201 of the Constitution gives power of approving budget to Parliament. And the President only signs that after it passes Parliament. Has Parliament failed Kenyans?
Yes. Answer is simple yes. Parliament has failed Kenyans. Parliament has just become a rubber stamp. I will ask you, I mean, where do you get some serious, critical, intellectual debates in Parliament in which the issues that affect the common Kenyan is brought out into the fore? No. I mean, this Parliament is a pale shadow of all the parliaments that were there before. I'm talking about this one and the last one, the 12th Parliament and the 11th Parliament. A massive, massive disaster for this country because they failed. They failed to hold the executive accountable for all its actions and all these crazy things that the executive did over this period of time. As for now, we're going. You have to. The shilling will be devalued. If it's not devalued by the central bank itself, it's going to be devalued by the market forces. You see what I mean? Already, what is the shilling today? It's transacting at over 100, what, 108, 107?
Thereabout.
Yeah, thereabout, yes. It's going to be brought down by the market forces. And then we will have a problem because when you borrow from this one and borrow from this one and borrow from this one to pay this and to pay this, and suddenly all those debts are going to mature.
Okay, so that's
at the same time. So where do you borrow from again?
Okay, so
you don't borrow from heaven.
More or less, it's a description of a Ponzi economic scheme.
Ponzi economic scheme is bound to collapse one time or the other.
Okay,
you got it. That's the right word for our economic